Understanding that the property market moves in cycles is key, but getting the cycles right and knowing where we are in that cycle and what's happening with that cycle is also very important. Another key factor is understanding how money works and the concept of money within the markets and how that affects us as property investors, property developers, and landlords as well. So in this video, I have a very experienced, very knowledgeable person, David Clouter, who's sharing his knowledge and experience around economic cycles for property investors. So look, I know you're going to love this video and I look forward to seeing you at the end.
Hey, oh my goodness, isn't
Fantastic.
that posh?
Perfect.
Right, so hello everybody. We're going to rattle through this at about 6 times the speed of light, because then at 8 o'clock I'm going to disappear and do a live radio show on the other side of town. I was going to do this from the radio studio, which would have been very exciting, but there's somebody on the air there now, so I'm on tape for the first bit. So I've been a property investor now since 1981, which is quite a long time, and I follow different strategies at different times in the market. I've done all that sort of stuff, but that's all the sort of sexy DJ type stuff. But this is the important stuff. The important thing is to invest for the long term, I think, in property. If you want something that's going to make you money in 10 minutes, then I'm afraid property is not for you. But if you want to make a lot of money in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or longer, then property is absolutely the way to go. And the thing about property is that even if you make a few mistakes, the fact that the market slowly rises over time is going to correct those mistakes. So it's very difficult to, if you buy the wrong kind of widgets for your factory or something like that, you're in trouble. But as far as property is concerned, it just keeps on going. Now, obviously, I'm not an official advisor, and I don't do tax and legal and accounting today, but I'm sharing today my experiences as a property investor, the highs, the lows, and all the bits in between. Marquis of Queensberry rules, of course, and almost it's Chatham House rules that we sort of, oh, that's me as a youngster. We don't want all these slides, and that's our esteemed people who are going to isolate themselves. He's not around anymore. Let's fast forward to where the talk actually starts. Some of these extraneous slides. This was something that was for a right. Do property cycles really exist? Now, if they didn't, I suppose I wouldn't be here. So yes, they do. Here's a very early example of something I did. This was during the credit crunch, actually, and it's actually Lothair Road, North London, N41EW. I bought it for 430. No, I bought it for 300,000 in October, refurbished it over the winter, actually spent a couple of months living there because it's so nice, and then put it on the market in the summer and made a nice tidy profit, really, without doing too much work to it. That's the property in question, that one in the center of the picture with the car in front of it. So there are times when the market is rising of its own accord, when that is the thing to do. So what I got there was a big bunch of cash. Now there are other times, and so remember that last slide was 2007. 2009 would have the credit crunch. And in fact, that 2007 one was about 2 months before the credit crunch. So then the market bottomed, and I did the same thing in reverse, really. There was a property where the asking was 430. I offered 320 and I got it. And similarly, kind of nice looking property there. That's the before pictures. It's nice to buy properties that look a bit like that, because after a bit of tidyage, they become much more user friendly. And but in terms of buyers, it puts them off. So I got some equity there. If you want to know what happened in the credit crunch, the best way to do so is to watch that film with Brad Pitt in it, The Big Short, which is a very close representation of a guy who was able to short the property market, who went on his gut instinct, made a lot of money for himself and his investors, really exposed the flaws in the big securitization that was going on. And then I was doing some flips up until about 2016, and those are actually the before pictures of a flip I did, but when I was into flip mode again this time around. I love that stable door on the right hand side, by the way, and that's what it looked like afterwards. That was only after 5 weeks. So so all that sort of thing is quite doable, and that's me helping another guy. I decided to come in and supervise that day. That's me in the bottom left. We won't leave that one on for very long, and that is the after photo of that particular property that was staged. The stained glass window that you'll see there on the left is actually a piece of roll-on sticky tape that you get from B&Q online for a £5, but it doesn't half make a difference because behind there is a brick wall. So all these things are very important when we're doing our property journey. That was my first ever HMO. I bought that in London with also loads of rooms, and it cost me a massive £114,000. A house like that would today be worth 800. So something here has to be going, and it wasn't that long ago. It was 1992, and I'd been buying flats up until that point. So 8 times your money in what, less than 30 years is a pretty damn good return, really. So you know, what's it all about here? And has my slide frozen at this point? Isn't that lovely when that happens? You've got to love it when that happens. So we'll go back to the screen, and the rest of the talk seems to have disappeared, but that's not to worry. We'll probably try reloading it whilst we talk to you again. So it's all part of the fun. I have no idea, I tell you, why that is happening. So you'll see me fiddling around a bit as I continue to talk. But basically, I'm here to tell you, about the property cycle and the way that we can use the natural random kind of variations of the market that just happen day to day, how we can use these to our benefit, which is principally a question of it's principally a question actually of bucking the trend, of being the contrarian investor, of not following the herd, but of standing to one side, of taking a long, hard look. What's going on in the marketplace, evaluating it according to really our own criteria, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But it's about taking that big picture and not following. In a sense, it's very similar, you see, to this coronavirus outbreak that we have now, because if you look at that, you have a much higher chance of dying in a car crash than you do of connecting this virus, whatever the press may tell you. So by if you like, making your mark, and by making your own assessment, by looking at the hard numbers, and working out, I suppose, what is the best outcome in the light of the facts. It's the best way to kind of to go ahead, if you like. So we're getting back to these wonderful slides now, and we have see here's the first real one that I wanted to share with you tonight, and we'll get rid of that one at least. I'll probably keep the one on the left, if you don't mind, in case I get lost.
Absolutely.
So, you can see here on the top left of the screen a sort of sawtooth type thing. It's really quite extraordinary, and it's almost like clockwork. The only little bits that are wrong, you can probably see my mouse pointer there as well, I don't know, is at the top of the 1921 that we had actually blown up a lot of houses during the First World War, and we were in the middle of a recession, so it didn't peak quite as much as it was. The thing was lengthened a bit, as you can see there in the 1950s. There's a big post Second World War building boom there, but it's more or less, you can see those peaks, you can more or less see those troughs heading up regularly. So if you knew that was going to happen, why wouldn't you buy property in those troughs? And why wouldn't you sell it during those peaks? The first guy who actually discovered, shall we say, property cycles was a fellow called Homer Hoyt. He was based in Chicago. He was an economist, and he wrote a book looking at 100 years of land values, and he noticed that there was a pattern. There are some odd things that you can actually look at to judge property cycles. Like, for example, the price of copper shoots through the roof when we're in the middle of a property boom. There it is at $3.23 a pound, as opposed to 71 cents when nobody's very much buying properties, because copper is used a lot on building sites. Maybe not so much now for plumbing, but tell me a single electrical cable that doesn't use copper there. And historically, quite interestingly, quite unusually, for about the last 100 years or so, right at the peak of a property boom, somebody somewhere announces the world's tallest building. In July 2007, that was the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, and they just got up to level 141, at which point they'd just beaten the record, but it had a few more meters to go, when lo and behold, the market crashed. So quite an interesting indicator there. So we've got this this cycle going on, and it roughly runs for 18 years. We buy when prices are low, we sell when prices are high. And when the price of the property is significantly lower than the cost to construct new buildings, we build like mad. When at the other end, and we hit this expansion phase where you can't sell it fast enough. But when the price of property plunges so that it costs more to build them than you sell them for, obviously you stay well clear of that particular strategy. And if you're an asset builder like me, you just stock up. There are 12 monthly cycles in property as well. And the property year, I suppose, begins, if you like, on the 1st of, it's on the 1st of November, really, once we've got Halloween and all that out of the way, because everybody goes gooey-eyed and they're all off to the shops to buy. In most years, probably not so much this year with all the viruses and things, but everybody heads to the shops. And in November and December, there are very few, the volume of property transactions absolutely plummets. And this happens year after year, whether we're in boom or in bust in the context of the big market as a whole. So that is, for you as a smart investor, it's a very good buy time. January, the first week in January, is the biggest time on the calendar actually for divorces. Funnily enough, all the divorce lawyers won't give their people time off after Christmas, because I suppose people are stuck together over Christmas, where normally they just see each other for 5 minutes a day or something, and after 2 weeks stuck together with the family, they just discover that their differences are quite irreconcilable. So everybody heads to divorce courts, which means again those properties come to market. The daffodils come out in spring, and straight away people are buying. So if we've bought these properties in sort of November, December, we've certainly had them refurbished by March and April, and we can sell right up until the next dip, which occurs sort of June, July, August, when everybody's going on holiday, and then they can't possibly think of buying then. So again, that's quite a good time to buy, because there won't be many people bidding against you. And there's a mini boom, September, October, when we can sell the things that we bought then. It can even happen, that at the same place, or at different places at the same time of the year, prices can be radically different. And we see on the top left little graph there, something that at the same quarter is just really fizzling away and crashing without really even having had a boom. That could be a local factor, like the closure of a shipyard or something like that. Then we see another market sort of spiraling up. Maybe Amazon have announced a workshop, a new warehouse there or something like this. And we see another market still following the market boom and bust, more or less in step with the local country. So there are local boom bust cycles as well as the national ones. And that's something to bear in mind. Here's Peterborough. And this shows you that over an entire decade, the property prices in Peterborough at 2005 were exactly the same in 2015. So we can't always plan for growth. And there are some areas that enjoy a huge amount of capital growth and others don't, but we invest in those, if you like, in different ways. Do you remember there was a TV show, I don't know if it's still on, called Location, Location, Location? Well, these two properties are quite interesting. This one at the bottom is in Devon, I think it is, and it's sold, oh, it actually says that there, it's sold for £500,000, £500,000 for all of that. But some banker from the City of London is not going to buy that, because it would take him all day to commute into work and back. So he would be much more interested in this rubbishy old garage in Chelsea, which actually sold for £50,000 more than the mansion. These are actual sold prices from a couple of years back. Now, you've probably heard about the north-south divide, and you're wondering, is it true or not? Well, it's really true. And here's the line. So today, speaking to you, I'm just below the line, and you guys are above the line, and it's a real line that cuts England in half. During sort of boom times, that line moves a bit further north. You can see it's not a horizontal line cutting England in half that way. It's sort of diagonal line. Below that line, we're all a bit prosperous. Above the line, the numbers are very, very different. So that The government spends more on people below that line. The life expectancy is longer below that line. There are a lot of Labour voters traditionally above that line, not quite so many now that Boris has got his majority, but come the next election, it'll probably even up a bit. And look at the difference in house prices, 150 grand above the line, 500,000 below it, which is a very, very radically different thing. So as an investor, should I invest in the blue bit or the red bit? It depends what you want, really. And the traditional view is invest below that line for capital growth, where historically the properties do double every decade, and invest above that line if you want cash flow. But looking at it the smart way, that capital growth isn't guaranteed, and there might be factors which affect the market, which scare investors, you know, whether it's coronavirus or whether it's a credit crunch or something like that. Then if you want certainty, the thing to do is to invest above the line in those red areas. And if you want cash flow, you've got it. You just cash up and you can keep spending the money that's coming in. But if you wanted that capital growth, then the simple thing to do would be to simply use the cash flow either to pay down your loans or to buy more stuff, and in that way you kind of you sidestep the whole issue, if you like, and you make it a win-win. And it's certainly something that you can absolutely it's more of a safe bet if you want to make a safe bet, and if you want to have more certainty, invest above that line, particularly if you invest very close to that line, because you get the best of both worlds. And where you are today, as you can see, is just slightly above the line. So that is what I think some people call a sort of gold mine area, really, really fantastic sort of area. There are demographics of age, which also will differ from one area to another. And what we can see interestingly here is that the bit we're looking at is the upgraders from 45 to 59, who are big buyers, and the downgraders from 60 to 74, who are big sellers. So if we can bridge that gap, and the downgraders' houses will always be a bit, shall we say, tatty, and if we can make them look pristine, and if we can take a 74-year-old's house and sell it to somebody of 45, there's a huge amount of profit to be made there. We should think also about our own life cycles, and do feel free to interrupt and message me any questions. I'm not sure that I'd be able to see them, but Saj could certainly read them out. When we're young, we've got a lot of energy, a lot of get up and go, a lot of pizzazz. And what we might like to do when we're young is we might want to be a bit more highly geared, perhaps, which is not, you know, necessarily a bad thing at all. But as we get older, similarly in corporate life, you're quite ambitious in the 25 to 34, 35 to 44 age bracket, and you'll do lots of overtime. But by the time you're 55 plus, you know, you just want a nice, easy life, and you're going home at clocking off time every day. And the same with the properties. So try and make it a bit more passive as you progress, and you know, fit in with what else is going on. Don't listen to people in pubs, please, whatever you do, because they always get it wrong. Unless you want to end up like the fella in the pub doing your 9-to-5 job for the rest of your life, I advise giving that a very wide berth indeed. So what do we need to know about these property cycles? Because we can make money by trading. Now we can time our transactions, we can plan our resources, we can protect ourselves before a downturn, and we know what to do next, because every 18 years it kind of repeats. So what I was doing in 2010, I'll be doing again in 2028, roughly speaking. I mean, they're not always exactly religiously 18 years, but they're pretty close. There are 4 stages of this property cycle. It starts really after a crash, when everybody's a bit upset and a bit uptight, a bit worried. Everybody has either lost money themselves in property or knows somebody who has. So there are lots of stories of doom and gloom. Nobody wants to just be the first to take the plunge. in that sector as well, because corporate buyers have to justify it to the board. There's not a lot of activity. So the sharp, smart investor is investing like crazy in this sort of thing and buying stock. We passed the midway point, and then there's a lot of new construction, and voids decline, and there's a lot of profitability, lots of opportunity to do flips and that kind of thing. But what happens then is that the market basically overheats, and everybody's building too much stuff, and the demand just sort of tails away. And suddenly, it usually happens suddenly. The crash is quite a quick thing. Somebody gets a bit shaken up. The whole thing crashes slowly at first, then it goes into free fall, and then it all starts again. And in terms of the timing of the thing, if you buy when you haven't quite reached the bottom of the market and you keep buying for a year or two after that, you're not really going to go wrong. The market consists of two things, really. There's the red line, which is the long-term property inflation thing, and the blue line, which is waggling around all over the place, is that is the factor which is basically in the same way that city markets trade. I mean, look at the sort of coronavirus ups and downs of Wall Street and the FTSE that we've seen this week. We've seen the Dow doing crazy things. Well, people do that. It doesn't mean the fundamentals have changed that much. It means they're kind of trying to look ahead. And the same with property, that people will pay more than something's worth at the points where we would want to sell if we're sellers, and people would be avoiding the market where we buy if we're buyers. Let's have a quick look at inflation now. And this is, I actually started property a couple of years before 1985, when a £20 note would buy you enough stuff to stockpile against coronavirus for a month, whereas now it will just go buy you a couple of pizzas and a beer, and that won't last you very long. And that is the sort of diminishing purchasing power of money. But how can we turn this to our own advantage? And I think that's basically the thing that we want to do here. And if I can find the relevant slide, which I might or might not do, then we'll might have even been deleted from that talk, but we'll talk around it. See why I need to see the ones on the left. Let's have a look at people's traditional view then of how money works, in order to sort of drill down on this a bit. They think that sort of money goes on forever, really, and that we buy goods from the factory, which then puts the money into the bank, which then ultimately pays our wages. But that's not entirely true, you see. And so we also have this impression that pensioners put their money into the bank, if they can find a high street one nowadays, because obviously pensioners can't use apps, and neither can I. And then the bank very kindly lends it to the young borrowers who buy a new home. But that doesn't really work, because there are only £133 million of savings last time I checked, but there are £1.27 trillion of lending. So there's something a bit funny going on there. And let's just have a quick think about how all that works. Well, basically, first of all, when the money supply is going to get a bit short, the banks will effectively create more. The Bank of England will effectively create more money by what's known as quantitative easing, by printing some more. But then it's the banks who will really, by a process known as fractional reserve banking, they will lend that money out multiple times. So a way of thinking about that is, suppose I put £100 in the bank, and my bank statement shows that I've got £100 in my account. Well, we know that the bank makes their money from lending, so the bank might lend out 95 of those £100 to somebody else, and that person might buy a car, for example. Now the person who sold the car has then got £95, and they put that in the bank as well. No new money was created, but suddenly the bank has got £195 on the books rather than the £100 that you put in, and then that 95 is going to get lent out again. So the actual amount of real money in the banking system is quite hugely less than we think. And so the green bits are actual money that people's deposited, and the red bits on the bank's balance sheets, and we're looking at all the big guys there, represent multiple times of lending it out. And here are the slides I was looking for that actually illustrate that point I was making, that you put 10 grand in the bank, and the bank keeps, let's say, £1,000 in reserve. We got the sort of Basel undertakings now where there are reserve limits. So the other 9,000 goes out to somebody who wants to buy a car. There's the car, and then the person who sells the car puts 9,000 into the bank, and so the bank has got £19,000 there. And that's quite an interesting way to sort of look at this. But this, as property investors, this definitely affects us, because when I borrow £100,000 to with which to buy a property, say I put in, I don't know, £30,000 of my own or whatever, the bank it's great for the bank because they get the deeds of my property and they get 20 years worth of interest payments from me, if you like. So that's a pretty good thing. What I don't realize as a lender, although I do now, is where that money actually comes from. Well, because of the fractional reserve system, no extra money is actually deposited at the bank. So a little clerk in an office somewhere actually just types in 100,000 into a database, followed by enter. And despite all the hoops that I've had to go through to persuade the bank that I'm a good lending risk, they're mostly brought in by regulators. The bank would like to lend all day long. So I've gone through all the hoops, and there comes the money. It didn't really come from anywhere, and that's quite an interesting concept to get your head around. But there you go. This has a knock-on effect, this ability of the banks to pluck money out of thin air, on other types of investment like crowdfunding or indeed Bitcoin, because they are just moving existing assets around, and they are not empowered by law to create any new stuff. Now, how does this work in practice for us as property investors? Well, let's suppose I've got a house worth £100,000. How can we make this business of inflation work for us? Well, at this point in time, a house costs £100,000. I've got a house which is worth 100. I've got property which is worth 100. So my total net worth is 200. But that's the equivalent, if you think about it in terms of tins of baked beans or houses, that's 2 houses worth of wealth. Now, so I turn on the radio one day. I don't know, would that be BRMB in Germany, in Birmingham and Wolverhampton? I don't know if that's still on the air anymore. But after 10 years, I found my house has doubled in price. So a house will now cost me £200,000, and that is the value of my buy-to-let. So, are we going to celebrate the house rocketing up in price, or are we going to be kind of quite despondent about that? Well, I'm going to be quite despondent, because here's what's happened. My £200,000 house, I'll now have to pay some CGT, even if I'm a basic rate, assuming it's owned in my name, assuming I'm a basic rate taxpayer. That's 25 grand gone, which is not very good indeed. So I've only got 7/8 of a house left, to all intents and purposes. And in terms of my savings, they've just halved, because my savings are only equivalent to half a house, and I've got to go to the bank and borrow the money for the rest. So my total wealth, which started off at 2 houses worth of wealth, is now equivalent to 1.4. So quite a lot has gone down the can. Have a word with your accountant. My dad used to be an accountant. He never used to kind of quite get his head around that one, but it's quite an interesting thing. Inflation is also a bit of a stealth tax for the banks as well, you see, because let's suppose that, and from 1972 right up until the credit crunch, the average rate of inflation was 5% per annum, if you average up the sort of super hyperinflationary 70s and the sort of later inflationary kind of lower times. So if I put my money, let's say it's £100,000 into the bank, and I want 3% of real growth, that would mean that when we factor in the inflation, just to stand still, my 100's got to be worth 105. So to get some real growth on my money from keeping it in the bank, I've got to have 108. The Chancellor, unfortunately, is going to say, aha, you've earned £8,000. I'll have a big chunk of that. So they're actually taxing the inflation as well as taxing the real income. And that means a real tax rate on your savings of 67%, because you're being taxed at, you're paying £2,000 worth of tax on real growth of only £3,000. And this is as a basic rate taxpayer. So how do we make this work for us? Well, we're in 1989, and we've got Bill, who's looking very suave and debonair, and he inherited £100,000 from Granny, and he's living the life of Riley, as it were, with champagne, caviar, and all that sort of stuff. Alan's working away in the office, and he's saved up £100,000 through hard work. But you see, Bill is the smart one. So Bill lends Alan £100,000 to buy this nice holiday, nice property. And this is in London. So we're talking, 30 years ago, where you could get a house like that in London for £200,000, which today would be worth a heck of a lot more, probably more like $1 million. Anyways, coming back to our story, Bill's got £200,000 now of asset, but he still owes £100,000 to Alan. Alan's got £100,000 secured on a mortgage, so he's quite happy too. But we fast forward 20 or 30 years, and I'm being pessimistic here. I'm assuming that house has only tripled, which it would have done much more than. So this house is now worth £600,000. Same property, because I actually used copy and paste to make the photo. So what's the situation now? Well, Bill's got 600 grand. He owes Alan 100 grand. So Alan's savings have inflated away to 1/6 of a house, and Bill's assets have sextupled, haven't they? So kind of by using things like that to our advantage, Bill has now got 5 times as much wealth as poor old Alan there. So you're probably wondering how to become a millionaire very easily. So if like me, you're happy to take the long view, you don't have to do any of the sexy, the latest strategies that are being touted in courses and all that kind of thing. You can do this vanilla buy-to-let thing, and you can just have a nice life and take it easy and go down to the beach with the laptop and all that kind of stuff, and become a millionaire anyway. Who would want to do that? Because some stress makes you ill. So let's suppose you buy a house for £100,000 in 1989, to use the same figures as before. You're investing 25% as the deposit, loan to value of 75%, and so you borrow 75 grand, and time passes. Well, here we are, where that house has tripled, as in the previous example. You still owe 75 grand, but your £25,000 deposit has grown here to £225,000. It's gone up by a factor of 9. Now let's imagine that instead of buying one house back in the day, you had bought 5 houses. Well, you've put in 5 lots of 25 grand, you put in £125,000, and you've actually made £1 million through that capital growth, which is not such a bad thing, really. The important takeaway is that, as property investors, we make money at all stages of the cycle, and that's a great area of a really great thing to do. I'm sure that you hear a lot of people talking about he's a very good example, actually, of one of the best contrarians of all time. This is Joe Kennedy, who was the father of the late JFK, President Kennedy of America. He was the father of Bobby Kennedy, who was Attorney General, and lots of other Kennedys as well. And he worked on Wall Street. He was a very rich man. And one day he was on his way to work when he stopped to have his shoes shined. And the shoe shine boy is giving him stock tips. Buy Hindenburg, sell that. And Mr. Kennedy very astutely thought, well, hang on a minute. When a 9-year-old, with absolutely no business expertise is telling me what to buy and sell, this market is clearly quite insane. So he sold big time, and this happened in about about the start of 1929. What happened a few months later? A massive stock market crash where people were absolutely wiped out, except for Joe Kennedy and a few other smart people who saw the writing on the wall and sold at the right time. Now, you'll hear a lot of people talking about what are the drivers for house prices in terms of supply, demand, and that kind of thing. The conventional thinking is that a booming population and not enough houses being built cause prices to rise because it's a supply and demand thing. but that is actually wrong. And this is another good little takeaway from tonight. It's good to know. What if it's money pressure driving those house prices? And what if it's booming credit driving the prices up and stagnant credit driving them around? The reason being that we don't buy houses with change in our pockets as we buy grapes or whatever at the supermarket. We buy houses with credit, so it depends on the lender's willingness to lend. And let me show you the old graphs that prove it. Well, this is the demand graph. Sure enough, in 1990 there was a huge demand and prices were booming. But look what happened to the credit crunch. The demand was very high indeed, but properties fell through the floor, and the correlation was only 21%, which is pretty low, but not as low as the supply side was, where this is like all over the place. The blue line of house price changes, the red line of supply. There's just very little correlation at all. Maybe it's interest rates. It's not. Interest rates peaked in about 1980. Prices peaked in about 2006. It's not that either. And when interest rates are high, they can only be high because the economy is booming, which is why the Fed and the Bank of England had to cut the interest rates to address this coronavirus crisis, which will all be over in 18 months, and then all the assets will bounce up again. So there's a hint. It's money. It's the availability of lending. How much can people borrow? There is a very high correlation here between the bank's willingness to lend money and the availability of money and house prices. And the correlation there is about 42%, and the house price change lags just a few months behind that money suddenly being made available, and everybody rushing down the bank to get some. Now, who reads their newspapers? I mean, they're as inaccurate about house prices as they are about coronavirus. And regardless of what the newspapers are actually saying, I think you'll find that the chances are that the market is doing something completely different indeed. And when the newspaper, for example, says that prices will fall forever, we reach the bottom. When the newspapers say prices will rise forever, we've reached the top. So this is good stuff to bear in mind. Now, who knows more about the market? An analyst sitting in London in some shiny glass and steel office somewhere with his computer, or the fella on the beat or lady, the estate agent who is dealing with these properties every day, all day long, has got a feel for which way the market is heading and knows the local market, the recently sold prices, long before they appear on land registry data and feed into sales and stuff. So I think this is it's worth taking him a coffee sometimes, and really be nice to your agent. He'll be nice to you. Probably sources aren't going to know as much as agents, because agents just have far more stuff on their books. So even if you're using a sourcer to buy, do make friends with the agent and buy some stuff for him as well. And there we see some old figures about house price changes. Well, we're very nearly kind of at the end now. George Osborne did an awful lot of damage to the housing sector with his Section 24 and other measures, other sort of very strong anti-landlord measures. One of the reasons why they did all that stuff is perhaps because elections are won and lost based on the marginal constituencies. If yours is a sort of hard Labour seat, if yours is a strong Tory seat, that isn't going to change. So they're kind of going to ignore you. In the 2010 election, some research was done that indicated that the marginals, which mattered, were the ones down in Devon and Cornwall and around about there, farming communities. So like the entire cabinet went down there, and the government promised all sorts of subsidies and stuff and won the election. Well, round about the sort of 2015 mark, the research showed that in the top, I think 60 it was, marginal constituencies, there were a lot of tenants. So we had to do some tenant-friendly legislation, which is kind of, what happened there really. And so I think I think that was the thing, and so that was quite an interesting turn of events. Now, moving on to some of these other slides, unfortunately, as you can see, I've lost my thing, so I'll have to go through these slides very quickly now because I don't want to go through all of them. But yeah, we can certainly say that nobody knows for sure what the future is going to hold in property, and any sort of economic forecast is a guess. Sometimes people with dartboards or chimpanzees have beaten the market, and you know, that's as it is. There are people who say, is buy to let dead, given section 24, where the numbers change very dramatically, but no, it isn't. You need to buy more keenly, you need to incorporate, and there are a lot of things that have in fact happened differently, and mandatory licensing, costs of compliance, and there'll be a long time before Labour's in power, so we're okay in terms of that one. But there's a lot of lobbying goes on, as you can see, these are huge things that have changed. Britain used to be a so-called nation of shopkeepers, but basically, you know, the supermarkets moved in and did away with that. And there's a real sense in which developers are moving into these markets now, and it's becoming less sort of amateurish and more professional. Not necessarily a bad thing. Quick word about the budget, because we're running very close to time now, and there are some things that will help those of us who work in property. The temporary relief on business rates has got to be a good thing. That will also help developers who are doing those commercial to resi things. Increases in what you can claim on capital allowances are good. There's going to be a small cash grant, but only for businesses eligible to for small business rates relief, £3,000. An uplift in the lower threshold for the old national insurance contribution, which is brilliant. The 2% SDLT surcharge on foreign buyers, which doesn't really affect us much if we're resident. Bit of a bad thing, the entrepreneurs lifetime relief. This is the thing I'm most peeved about, really, being slashed enormously from 10 million all the way down to £1 million. But here's the most interesting thing really about the budget, is that when this budget came into place, nobody really knew how the coronavirus situation was panning out. It's turning out to be much more of a problem than we thought even last Friday. And the government advice is changing all the time. So my money is on having another budget quite soon. I think we'll have to have a second emergency budget, because I think the assumptions that underpinned that budget, the rug is about to be pulled from under the Chancellor, and I think we'll need some more emergency measures to get things started in the coming months, to sort of, you know, get things back on track. And I think that's the thing at the moment. As things stand, those were very old slides, as you can see, but I'll try and see if I can do some more updated stuff. A lot of these slides are quite ancient and need bringing into the 2020s, but we'll certainly see what we can do. Thank you very much, Saj, for having me, and thank you everybody for your attention. It's been pretty awesome, and I've enjoyed sharing my property journey and some of my strategies with you tonight.
David, thank you so much. Much appreciated for that. So do you have a couple of minutes for questions, or do you need to go right now?
Very happy to do some quick Q&As, because that's all good.
So if you've got a question for David, I'd be quick with that keyboard and get that question in. I'll try and get it answered for you before David leaves. So a question for me then, David, where do you see the opportunity for us as property investors over the coming 6 and 12 months as the market starts to change, particularly with the impact with the virus right now?
It's very interesting. I think I wouldn't overstate the impact of the virus, because it is a kind of storm in a teacup. It will. the first vaccine for this virus is actually going into human trials now. They've bypassed the animal testing phase altogether. China got the DNA blueprint of that virus out very, very quickly. The labs got to work. So, you know, there are certain drugs that are showing very promising results against this drug as well. There are certain kind of combinations. For example, some of the SARS drugs, for example, some of the HIV drugs starting to kick in. So I don't think this will go along as long as anybody says. It is obviously a factor in the short term. It's especially a factor if you've got an HMO, because you've got to really put some systems in place for what you do if one of your tenants gets infected. We are going to see some kind of Brexit outcome on the 31st of January, come what may. And I think that is something that we really need to look at in the coming months. Whether we think Britain is going to actually crash out without a deal, or whether, you know, how many months we've got now, so 8-9 months, whether that's going to be enough to put a framework in place that allows us to continue working with our European neighbours. That will affect house prices. And then it may be that, for example, countries like America use coronavirus as an excuse to pull up the drawbridge. We've heard that China now, who have more or less got over this using some fairly extreme measures, are going to be ramping up their economy while everybody else is still reeling and still working out what to do about it. So there are going to be some global shifts going on. So I think in terms of big picture, the first little spring shoots of a recovery, we go out there and buy. But looking at the big picture, looking at the small picture, look at things happening in your local economy. I always look for 5 things when I'm looking to invest in a new area, and I want to see a hospital there. I want to see some kind of university or college there. And I want to see, I don't get out much, so I don't know much, but I want to see 3 household name companies putting big investments into a particular area, so that, for example, you know, if you're in Barrow-in-Furness and suddenly the shipyard closes down or something, you're in trouble. But if you've got 5 big sources of tenants, and yes, I don't do commercial, I do resi stuff because it's vanilla. It's, you know, as long as you comply with the regs, it's not too much hassle. But I think commercial could see, and this is not my idea, I got this idea from a very smart fella not far from you called Rupert Chapman. I think now that firms are being forced to work from home, big firms, they could find they like that. So they could give up the big offices altogether, and then all those could flip to resi. That would affect the supply of resi. It would affect people in the commercial sector. So we might see a big shake-up. We might see that's the biggest likely shake-up in my view as the results of the corona.
Yes, it's interesting that because there's a gradual shift towards people working from home, not working in offices anyway. And this has really speeded that process up and sort of pushed people into that situation immediately working from home, and how the companies cope with that. And as you said, if they cope and it works well, then actually that serves their purpose.
That's absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head there, and I think that's perhaps the biggest change that we might see as a result of this, because we're not going to be in a year's time walking down the street keeping 2 meters between us and the next fella. But you know, the use of our office space might change, particularly when companies look at the bottom line, and if everything is, and obviously they've got KPIs and metrics, and if everything is shaping up exactly the same as it would have done in the office, and there are apps that allow you to sort of remote monitor what your employees are doing.
Yes.
So if everything kind of shapes up, that could be the big outcome for the 2020s.
Interesting. Let's do one quick question, and only question we'll take then from Mitch before we finish then. So a question from Mitch is, where are we currently on the property cycle in your view?
That's a very interesting one, because I was pretty good at guessing this kind of thing right up until, well, the things that came along were George Osborne's Section 24, and then the Brexit vote, and then Parliament was sort of paralysed for 3 years, and it just threw everything completely off. So at the moment, we're in a sort of seesaw, sort of pivotal type point where it could flatten out or it could go up. It could go either way really now, because this is just a time that we haven't seen before. We've had lots of things all happening at once, whereas normally it's one big event that triggers these things. So I'm optimistic. I mean, you can always use a thing called pound cost averaging, where you just buy a house a year, and then after 20 years you've just got 20 houses you bought at the average price. If you're worried, I'd recommend doing that. Excellent.
David, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that. Whoa, wasn't that amazing? I hope you enjoyed that video. David's an amazing guy, very, very knowledgeable. I'm sure you've found that out for yourself just now. Look, please like and share the video, subscribe to the channel if you found it useful. Hit the notification bell so you can get the videos as soon as I'm releasing them. My intention is to get these to you as fast as I possibly can, as the market's changing really quickly. So you have the information, you know what's going on. And if you've got a question, put it in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.